When people hear the word abstinence, the first thing that usually comes to mind is denial, a restriction, a refusal to engage in something pleasurable. The idea that someone is withholding from sex either because of religion, shame, or fear of intimacy. But that is the shallowest way to look at it. The most external, one-dimensional understanding of a deeply personal experience. Because at its core, abstinence isn't just about saying no. It's about creating space to finally hear the yes from within. That quiet, internal affirmation that we often silence in pursuit of connection, validation, or the comfort of being wanted. We live in a world that constantly tells us our worth is tied to our desirability. That attention equals affection. That physical intimacy equates to emotional closeness, so we give. Freely, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes desperately, but most times unconsciously, hoping that through touch, we will receive confirmation that we are lovable, beautiful, desirable, chosen. We say yes to others before ever checking in with ourselves, before ever realizing how much of ourselves we give away without consent from our soul. Abstinence disrupts that pattern. It introduces a radical silence in a life filled with noise. When you choose abstinence, whether for spiritual, emotional, mental, or simply personal reasons, you're not just withholding from physical intimacy. You're creating room to finally meet yourself, room to listen, room to understand what your body, mind, and heart have been trying to say all along. When the physical stops being the default language of connection, we are forced to find other ways to feel close to others and to ourselves. For some, this feels like loneliness. But for others, it becomes an awakening. You begin to realize how many of your past yeses weren't authentic. How often you were saying yes with your body while your soul was screaming no, or worse, how you used your body as a way to be heard, seen, or loved, when what you really needed was time, care, and emotional safety. This is the truth most people are not ready for. Abstinence is not the absence of desire. It is the presence of discipline. It's not that you suddenly stop wanting intimacy, touch, or connection. It's that you are no longer willing to pay for it with your peace. You're no longer ready to trade your silence for someone else's comfort. When you stop saying yes out of habit, out of fear, or out of emotional hunger, you begin to hear something softer. A voice that doesn't just want to be touched, but to be understood. A voice that doesn't want to be needed, but respected. A voice that no longer seeks to be chosen because it finally chose you. This is the shift, the moment abstinence transforms from a rule into a revelation. You begin to realize that you were never empty, never broken, never in need of saving. You were just drowning in the noise of a world that convinced you that physical access is proof of emotional value. And in that silence, the one abstinence gives you, you begin to feel full. Not because someone is filling you up, but because you finally stopped leaking energy in places that never poured back into you. Abstinence gives you the pause you didn't know you needed. A pause from people, patterns, and pleasures that never truly served you. And in that sacred stillness, the yes you hear isn't about anyone else. It's not about waiting for a ring or a partner or a promise. It's not even about sex. It's the yes to yourself, yes to your healing, yes to your worth. Yes to not being available for anything that demands your body but ignores your soul. We don't often realize how loud the body can be. The pull of attraction, the ache of desire, the tension in moments of closeness. These things speak louder than most of us are willing to admit. The body has a language of its own, one that often overrides logic, boundaries, even values. It demands to be felt, to be satisfied, to be acknowledged. But what happens when we choose not to respond? When we mute the body's default reactions and intentionally retreat into stillness? Abstinence in its purest form is not suppression. It is conscious redirection. It is choosing silence, not as an act of deprivation, but as an invitation. An invitation to connect not with another, but with yourself. Because when the noise of physical gratification goes quiet, when the cycle of longing and temporary fulfillment is disrupted, something surprising happens. You start to hear your own emotional breath. You begin to recognize what you've been ignoring within yourself all along. Many people are disconnected from who they really are because they've never had to sit with themselves for long enough. There's always been someone, something, some form of escape. Physical intimacy becomes a way to bypass introspection. It becomes a shortcut to feeling close without actually having to be vulnerable. But that closeness, more often than not, is external, performative. It doesn't touch the layers that truly matter. It doesn't hold your insecurities, your questions, or your wounds. It masks them. Silencing the body creates an uncomfortable gap, and that discomfort is where most people run. But if you stay, if you don't reach for the usual fix, you enter a different kind of relationship, the one with yourself. You begin to feel your loneliness, not as emptiness, but as a signal. You start asking questions. Why did I give myself so easily? What was I hoping to gain from that connection? Was it desire? Or was it avoidance? Abstinence doesn't make you holy, it makes you honest. In that honesty, the mirror gets clearer. You stop seeking validation through intimacy and start wondering why validation is something you crave in the first place. You stop confusing attraction with compatibility, chemistry with connection, and sex with love. The silence teaches you that physical closeness can never substitute for emotional presence. Not from another, and not from yourself. Without the noise of your body leading the way, you begin to notice things you once ignored. The way your energy shifts in certain environments, the heaviness after unfulfilling interactions, the quiet yearning for something deeper, more stable, more sacred. You begin to redefine intimacy, not as something physical, but something internal. You start to feel your emotions more vividly, process your desires more slowly, and most importantly, reclaim your ability to choose with intention rather than impulse. Self-connection isn't built in the loud, distracted spaces of life, it's built in the pause. In the moment you decide to feel your feelings instead of sedate them with temporary closeness. It's in the tears you cry when no one's watching. It's in the anxiety you name when your phone doesn't buzz. It's in the clarity that arises when you realize how often you've used your body as a currency to buy connection. This is why silence matters. It's not passive. It's not weak. It's not boring. It's where real awareness begins. You begin to hold space for yourself in ways you never did before. You become more curious about your patterns, more aware of your emotional boundaries, more in tune with what your soul has been whispering underneath the noise. You begin to remember yourself, not as someone who is only wanted, but as someone who is deeply, intrinsically worthy. One of the most sobering realizations that comes with abstinence is just how often we mistake emotional dependency for genuine connection. When physical intimacy is removed from the equation, what's left is the truth, raw, unfiltered, sometimes uncomfortable, but absolutely necessary. You begin to see with new eyes, not clouded by chemistry or influenced by the physical tension that often masks incompatibility. This clarity doesn't arrive immediately. It creeps in quietly, slowly, and with each passing day of silence, the fog lifts a little more. There's something about physical closeness that can create an illusion of emotional depth. You feel connected because the touch is familiar, the routine is comforting, and the moments are intense. But when you strip all of that away, the question becomes, who are they to you? Really, who are you to them? Or are you emotionally safe with this person, or just physically entangled? Abstinence forces this question to the surface because it takes away the shortcuts and the distractions. Suddenly, conversations become the only bridge. Words carry weight. Time becomes telling. Most people don't know how much of their emotional dependency hides behind physical intimacy. You feel validated when they reach for you. You feel needed when they desire you. You feel close when you lie in bed together. But remove that, and what's left? Can you sit with each other in silence and still feel connected? Can they see you clearly without the lens of lust? Can you sit with yourself without craving someone to fill the silence? This is what abstinence exposes, not just the other person, but your own patterns. You begin to notice how often you've used sex to glue relationships together that were already falling apart. How many red flags you ignored because the intimacy felt too good to leave behind. How often you accepted crumbs of attention because they were paired with passion. Without that physical closeness, you begin to assess the emotional structure of your connections. And more often than not, you'll find it weak, built on desire, not devotion, on habit, not harmony. The thing about emotional dependency is that it disguises itself as love. It feels urgent, it feels intense, it feels necessary, but it often lacks security, honesty, and balance. Abstinence reveals these imbalances in the quiet moments. When you stop engaging in physical intimacy, you're no longer sedated by the comfort it provides. The H of absence reveals how addicted you were to the feeling of being wanted, not necessarily to the person themselves. You start asking yourself harder questions. Was I in love? Or was I addicted to the way they made me feel? This kind of honesty is not easy. It stings. It brings up grief for the relationships you thought were real, but were simply familiar. It forces you to own how often you've settled, not because you lacked options, but because you lacked clarity. Abstinence hands you that clarity. It helps you observe your own emotional responses without immediately acting on them. It helps you understand the difference between desire and need, between attraction and alignment. When you're no longer wrapped in someone else's arms, you realize how much you relied on that feeling to quiet your inner chaos. And in that realization, a new strength begins to form. The strength to question what you once accepted, the strength to feel your own emotions instead of outsourcing comfort, and the strength to want someone without being controlled by that want. Emotional dependency thrives in the absence of self-awareness. Abstinence demands self-awareness. It forces you to confront the truth of your connections and whether they are built on genuine emotional intimacy or simply on the fear of being alone. There is a persistent lie circulating in conversations about abstinence, especially when a woman chooses it for herself. That lie is that abstinence is a sign of fear, repression, or inadequacy, that somehow choosing to refrain from physical intimacy is a weakness or a reflection of someone who doesn't know how to connect, or worse, someone who's running away from love. But that idea couldn't be further from the truth, because real abstinence, the conscious kind, the self-led kind, is not about fear. It is about strategy. It is a reset, a recalibration of your boundaries, your values, and your self-worth. Most people don't realize that physical intimacy has a cost, not just emotionally, but energetically, mentally, even spiritually. Every time you share yourself, there's an exchange happening, sometimes mutually fulfilling, but often quietly draining. The body remembers what the heart wants to forget. When you decide to pause, to step back from that exchange, you're not running away. You're taking stock. You're regaining control over a part of yourself that you may have been giving away without intention. Abstinence, when done with purpose, is not about punishment or denial. It is about redefining your relationship with yourself. It's about choosing to clear the emotional clutter and reset the way you allow people access to you. Because access to your body is access to your energy, and not everyone should have that. Not everyone has earned it. Not everyone knows what to do with it, and not everyone is equipped to pour back into the parts of you that intimacy touches. Choosing abstinence can feel like swimming against the tide, especially in a culture where constant access and instant pleasure are normalized. You're told that if you're not putting yourself out there, you're missing out. That if you're not being touched, you're not desirable. That if you're not saying yes, you're being difficult or distant or damaged. But it takes an entirely different kind of strength to say, I'm not available for that right now. It takes clarity to walk away from temporary validation and trust that your worth doesn't need physical proof to exist. Abstinence becomes a strategy when it's used to reset what you allow, what you accept, and what you attract. When you remove physical intimacy from your life, you're able to see how people engage with you when that's no longer on the table. Do they still show up with presence? Do they still invest emotionally? Or does the connection dissolve without access to your body? That is when you learn the truth about people's intentions. That is when you begin to filter your life through a more powerful lens, one that prioritizes emotional depth, consistency, and real compatibility. More than anything, abstinence is about regaining your internal compass. It's about tuning into your intuition again without the noise of entanglement. When you're constantly intertwined with others, your own voice gets drowned out. Your sense of direction becomes blurred by emotional expectations and physical familiarity. A strategic reset means clearing that interference. It means finally hearing what your soul has been trying to tell you about what you really want, what actually matters, and who you are without the attachments. Sometimes, that reset reveals painful truths. You might see where you've settled. You might remember how many times you've overridden your instincts. You might face the reality of what you've tolerated in the name of being wanted. But that clarity is the point. Because once you see clearly, you stop repeating the same patterns. You stop confusing attention for affection. You stop overextending for people who only show up when there's something to take. And you begin to show up for yourself in ways you used to expect from others. Abstinence is not a retreat. It's a realignment. It is stepping back not because you are broken, but because you are building. Because you're choosing to preserve your peace while redefining what it means to be connected, seen, and valued. Abstinence is not glamorous. It's not loud. It doesn't come with applause or public affirmation. In fact, it's one of the quietest, most invisible decisions a person can make. And yet, within that quiet lies an extraordinary power. Because abstinence, when chosen intentionally, doesn't just create distance from others, it creates proximity to yourself. The kind of proximity that can be uncomfortable, confronting, and even painful. But it's in that discomfort where the most honest healing begins. The moment you stop reaching for external connection as a way to escape your internal chaos, everything you've been avoiding starts to rise to the surface. The unresolved wounds, the past heartbreaks you never properly grieved, the self-doubt you kept masking with performance, the trauma you buried under people pleasing. Abstinence removes the distractions and compels you to look inward, not just at who you've become, but at how you got here. Most people underestimate how much of their identity is wrapped around being desired, being chosen, being wanted, being available. But when no one's touching you, when no one's calling late at night, when no one's validating your existence through their attraction to you, who are you then? That question has caused many to return to entanglements that didn't serve them, simply because the silence felt too loud. But the truth is that silence is where your true self starts to speak. And oftentimes, what it says first is hard to hear. You realize how long you've been trying to heal yourself through other people. How many times you offered your body when it was your soul that was crying out for attention. How many nights you confused temporary intimacy with genuine affection because you were too afraid to face your own emptiness. But here's what most never admit, that emptiness. It's not permanent, it's just a space waiting to be filled by something real, something lasting, something internal. Abstinence holds up a mirror, and not the kind that shows you your physical reflection, but the one that reveals what you believe about love, trust, worthiness, and safety. It shows you where you perform and where you pretend. It uncovers where you've been giving yourself away cheaply in the hopes of being kept. It invites you to sit with your emotional habits, the overthinking, the anxious attachments, the inability to be alone, and trace them back to their origin. Not to shame yourself, but to understand yourself. Because healing doesn't begin with blame, it begins with awareness. This internal confrontation is necessary. It's the detox your spirit has been asking for. When you're no longer bonded to anyone through physical connection, you are finally able to sort through your own energy. You begin to feel which thoughts are yours and which ones were borrowed. You start to see how many of your choices were rooted in survival, not self-respect. How much of your history was shaped by the need to be enough in someone else's eyes. But in abstinence, you're no longer acting for an audience. There is no one to perform for. There's only you and the work you've been avoiding. The most beautiful part of this process is that in facing yourself, you begin to return to yourself. You begin to care for your inner child who was once ignored. You start setting boundaries not out of fear, but out of reverence for your peace. You move slower, you listen more, you prioritize rest over rushing, and in the absence of physical noise, your intuition grows louder. You start trusting yourself again. You start believing that you are enough without being touched, without being chosen, without being pursued. Abstinence creates the sacred space needed to rebuild your self-worth from the inside out, not based on how much attention you receive, but based on how well you understand, accept, and protect yourself. It is not the easy path, but it is the path that brings you back to the parts of yourself that were buried under the weight of pretending, pleasing, and performing. It is in this space, raw, unfiltered, and deeply honest, that true healing quietly begins to take root. Abstinence is not about living in lack. It's about choosing a deeper kind of abundance, one rooted in clarity, intention, and emotional freedom. It's not just a pause from physical intimacy, it's a powerful return to yourself. In a world that constantly teaches us to give before we've healed, to please before we've paused, and to perform before we've processed, abstinence interrupts the cycle. It silences the body long enough for the soul to finally speak. And when that voice rises, shaky at first, then stronger with each day, what it tells you is revolutionary. You were never meant to be completed by anyone else. Your wholeness was never hiding in someone else's hands. It was waiting, quietly, patiently, for you to come back home to it. This journey isn't for the weak, but it is for the wise. For the woman who is ready to stop performing and start becoming. For the man who is done seeking outside what he needs to build within. For anyone who is tired of confusing chemistry for connection and longing for something real, not just with someone else, but with themselves.